Hey guys, so I'm making this video to give an update on my current keyboard layout for anyone who's interested, because I know, especially when it comes to alternate layouts like Engram, like I've been using, it's really interesting to see what other people try and do because so few people actually use layouts like this. So maybe some of you actually are interested in Engram or are using it and are just curious and how other people lay out everything else other than the letters. So hopefully this video will be useful for you guys. Now, the first thing to notice is I've been using Engram at least for about 4 months now, but I've done, a handful of changes to this layout. It's honestly a little unhealthy, I'm not gonna lie. But I've given a lot of different things a try, and I've found things that don't really work for me or things that kind of do work for me. So I don't want to go over everything because there's clearly way too much to even discuss. That said, I'm going to talk about some of the major things that I've tried and why they didn't really work for me. So I'd say the first thing that doesn't really work for me are home row mods, where people will set just the keys on the home row to be, for example, if you tap H, it will send an H, but if you hold it down, maybe it acts as a shift key or something. Now, those are kind of useful, and in fact, I am using some of these types of keys here in specifically, I guess, well, a few places on different layers, and they're pretty useful. But I don't find I actually haven't tried fully home row mods properly, but what I have tried is the auto shift feature of these keyboards, although it's not the default auto shift because with Engram there's a custom shift layer, so I had to create a manual system where if I hold 1, it gives the Engram symbol for 1 instead of whatever the default is, which would be exclamation mark on QWERTY. That's honestly not too bad, especially if you're typing single capital letters at a time, but ultimately, I just don't think it's a good idea because it's inevitably going to slow you down because you can only make the hold action so fast. In fact, let me show you some of the settings I set to make it reasonable, because the first problem was I found that with preferred tab action and hold, tap, tap, hold, tap dances, it's a lot of tapping. If this setting is turned on, which it is by default, then there's a lot of latency and it feels really bad to type on. Turning this off made it much better. It made it to the point where there was a little latency, but it didn't really bother me. I set the tapping term to about 145. That was about fast enough where I would never accidentally send the hold one, at least for the majority of the keys, but it would still be pretty quick so that it wasn't just like a huge waste of time. It's still not ideal, and especially if every single key has a feature like that, I just don't think it's ultimately great, because one of my main philosophies with the keyboard is it should be as fast as I can be. And the problem with keys that are held is I am inherently limited by the keyboard as opposed to me being the bottleneck. Because if I'm the bottleneck, then all I have to do is improve my skill and my accuracy and all that. And I think that just feels a lot better for me if I'm the bottleneck. That's one of the reasons that my shift functionality is on the thumb. You kind of have a handful of options with shift. So there's the hold each key to shift it thing, which is okay. There's a home row mod where you can hold one of the homing keys to activate shift. You can do pinky shifting like you normally do, or you could do thumb shifting. And I'm sure there's other things you could do, but those are the ones that I'm sort of considering. I'm not really into the hold down to shift functionality for the reasons I've mentioned. I'm also not really interested in any of the alternating shifts, because when I first learned to touch type, I basically only ever held down the left shift key, and it like wasn't that comfortable, especially if you can imagine what happens when you try and type like any of the symbols on the left that you need your pinky for. You either need to use your other finger, which is kind of weird, or you have to like then switch to the other shift. It just feels inherently slow to, if you're imagining you're typing in all caps, and yeah, let's ignore caps lock for a second, you would have to alternate which shift key you're pressing all the time, and that just is really inefficient. So you need a caps lock for typing in all caps. And then that's an additional a little bit of resistance, because you have to think, okay, am I typing one capital letter or am I typing a bunch of capital things at a time? And like, that's not that hard, but every little bit of resistance adds up over time, I find. So I really like having a thumb shift. I'm personally a left-hand spacer because I'm a gamer, so I'm just used to pressing space with my left hand. I know a lot of keyboards like the Kinesis or like the Glove 80 have space by default on the right, which is really weird to me, but I really like having shift on the right hand. And the benefit of having a thumb shift is I don't need a caps lock, because all I have to do is hold shift. In fact, let me show you actively. I can just hold shift here, and then I can just be typing all capitals for as long as I like, and it's pretty dang comfortable because it's just my thumb. My thumb's already there, I just have to hold down the key. And so I can type whatever I want in all caps, and it's not a big deal. So I'm a huge fan of the thumb shift key. But then that adds a lot of constraints into my layout. Because, of course, suppose you put like backspace next to shift. Well, then the problem is, if you make a mistake while you're typing a whole capital word, you have to let go of shift, and then you have to tap the key, and then you have to go back. And that's just like really not good, I find. That's been one of the main driving forces in my layout design, because I really like having these momentary action layers where it's only active when you hold down the key. The benefit of that is, again, I'm the bottleneck. I don't have to toggle something and then do it and then toggle back, like this, for example, right? I don't have to do this, type, and then go back. Because that's okay, but 2 actions to do one thing, it just feels inevitably slower. Whereas this, you can see just how fast it is if I want it to be that fast. And so that's why I'm a huge fan of these momentary action layers on shift, on my thumbs. The issue, of course, if you're in a layer, like I mentioned, then that thumb is in use. And so the other keys on that thumb are like not that useful. And that's the big problem, which is why I put shift on the right thumb instead of the left thumb, because I want to be able to press space when I'm typing capitals, because that's just very comfortable, as opposed to, okay, I'm holding shift and then space and then shift and space. And so I've ran into like a lot of these things that has shaped this layout. And so that's sort of the whole discussion here. For a while, I had a big symbol layout where on, I think, the left thumb, one of the buttons, I would have a momentary action layer that would give you a symbol layer. And the whole idea was you'd have your numbers and you'd have all your symbols on that layer, which is kind of nice because these keys on the top here are kind of hard to reach on the Ergodox, because it's a flat board, so it's just kind of, you have to move your entire wrist to actually reach those keys, which is fine. Some of them, like these pinky ones up here that I have, they're reachable and they're not even uncomfortable to reach, but you do have to move your wrist, which is ultimately not ideal. And so I experimented with different sorts of symbol layers. I've had the number row directly under the home row. I've had the number row, the layer directly above. I've put a numpad on the right. And they're okay, but every single layer you add adds more mental resistance. Similar to the idea of a caps lock, because that kind of is like another type of layer. And every single one you do adds problems. For a while, I had a symbol layer that you also had to shift in order to get symbols. So I really had 4 layers. I'd have a layer where it's just normal typing, and then I'd have a shifted layer, and then I'd have a symbol layer, and then I'd have a shifted symbol layer. And so if you're trying to imagine, okay, where's the symbol I'm trying to press, you have to consider 4 different layers and that it could be, and then you have to remember which key it's actually on in that layer. And you could definitely learn that, and that can be good. I just think it's too much resistance mentally. There's no point in doing something like that, which is why I've ultimately resorted to having the number row back, because it just kind of makes sense. There's something, when you've used those layers for symbols and numbers long enough, and then you switch back to a number row, even though you have to move your fingers further, it really just like takes a weight off your shoulders if you're trying to do like a variable name where you're like num2. And like, you don't have to do anything with your thumbs, you don't have to change the layer, you can just type normally on the base layer. And that's been one of the key things that I've realized with all this experimentation is that minimizing layers is ideal. Even if it has to be at the expense of keys being a little bit less reachable, it's probably for the best. Simply because it just adds so much less resistance. And of course, you get the benefit of you have more keys you can press on your board, so you have more room for symbols and you don't have to squeeze things onto several layers if you have to. So the layers I've basically come to terms with. I do have some extras, but for main typing, there's only 3. There's my base layer that you see here with all my symbols and all my numbers and stuff. Well, not all my symbols. All my letters, my numbers, and a good amount of symbols. And then I have a shifted layer. And I am using Engram's defaults for part of this. So let's take a look at what the default Engram layout looks like. You basically have letters arranged in this configuration with Z and Q on the right side. You then have your numbers and some brackets and stuff. But the key thing is the shifted version. Engram is designed to sort of, with its symbols, it's important to note that the letter design, the placement of each of the letters is based on frequencies of different bigrams and trigrams, engrams, if you will, along with other things. So the letter layout's a good thing. The symbol layout, on the other hand, is a bit independent of that. It wasn't designed to be good for rolling or good for engrams. The symbol layout was designed for, let's put the most common symbols in the middle column, okay, and then let's pair up these symbols with the number that makes sense. So for example, they put the pipe or the or symbol on 1 because it looks like a 1. They put the equals on 2 because, well, it's 2 horizontal lines and it kind of looks like the Chinese symbol for 2. 4, for example, is a plus because it's like 4 quadrants, right? 5 and 6, well, you put the brackets above the other brackets. 7, you have this sharp angle, kind of like 7 is a sharp angle. 8 and are kind of alike. 9 and percent are kind of alike. 0 and star are kind of alike. And so that was the whole design philosophy for this. And then you have some extra symbols over here because you just need to put them somewhere. There is some stuff I really like about this. For example, these column ones I really like. Having double quote and single quote on separate keys is so good for programming because personally, no matter what language I'm using, I'm going to use double quotes for strings and single quotes for characters if I'm programming, simply because I'm used to that in languages like C or Java. So even if I'm in Python or Lua, I'm going to be using double quotes for strings if it allows me to. And so not having to press shift for those is just really nice. Period and comma are in a great place. And then I really love the shifting. The shifting makes a lot of sense. The parentheses, it's fine, it's whatever. But shifted comma gives you semicolon, and shifted period gives you colon. That's really nice, because it's like, okay, we're taking the same symbol, and we're just adding a dot above it. That makes perfect sense. Shifted question mark is exclamation mark. That makes perfect sense, right? Shifted minus is underscore. That makes perfect sense. So I really like that layout of things. But I did have to make a small modification to those in order to make the rest of the symbols work well. So I have everything here normal, except this key, because the ultimate problem in programming is equals. Because the equal sign is one of the most pressed keys while you program. But more than that, you have so many bigrams with equals. For example, in Go, I have to type colon equals all the time to define things. You have to type plus equals, minus equals, times equals, divides equals, mod equals, and equals or equals, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, not equal to. So you have to type those things all the time. And so that's a ton of bigrams that all relate to the equal sign. So you have to be very careful with where you put equals. And in Engram's default layer, they put it under 2, which isn't horrible, but it's just not really a good location because it's not the most reachable key by itself, because you will also just press equals a lot to reassign variables, but also like plus equals and all these things, it's like really just not in the best spot. I also really find that these angle brackets, these chevrons on under 5 and 6, 5 and 6 are really hard to reach because it's a lateral index finger column, but it's also really high up. So like you have to completely shift your thumb off of this key in order to reach 5 and 6 comfortably. So I wanted to take some weight off of those keys because angle brackets are so useful if you're writing HTML or if you're just doing comparisons with like less than or equal to or greater than and stuff. You need these keys all the time. So let's talk about the first thing I did. For a moment, let's go back off of symbols. For a long time, I did actually put Z and Q on the pinky, and it was fine. It was good. But ultimately, recently, I've decided to put Q on this side. One, for symmetry, but two, because I really just want Enter to be over here. If you saw the last video, you know that in my nav layer, I used to have like Enter, Backspace, Tab, etc. on these keys. But I've moved them off because, again, things being on the base layer just feels really nice when you type. It's a little bit of resistance every time you have to activate a layer. So keys that you press all the time, like Enter and Backspace and Tab, it's really better to keep them off of those layers if you can. I find it's much more comfortable. I've moved Escape over to this pinky. It feels like a very natural place because you're kind of used to pressing Escape with the left pinky anyway, but now it's on the home row, so it's very reachable. Enter is on the other side, very reachable. Now I'm very happy with this. Because I tried having all the keys have alternate things, for a long time I put controls on the pinkies, and I really liked how that felt. I've had control on the space on the thumb keys. I've had control on the thumb keys, and those just never felt that comfortable to me because none of these outside keys were really that comfortable. I've even had control over here before, but it feels good to me to use control sort of like people normally use shift. Using an alternating your pinky for control is not a big deal because I'll type like Control Z all the time, type Control C, Control V, etc. And I really like having control on the pinkies, but there wasn't really a good spot for backspace and delete. But I realized I only need to hold down control. I don't need to tap it. So what I can do is I can just put backspace as a tap function and delete. And then, okay, you have some symmetry here, which is nice. You're deleting to the right. You press the thing on the left. You're deleting to the left. You hit the thing on the right. And there's some nice benefits with this. Number one, it's not good to really rely on holding down backspace anyway. Like, oftentimes maybe you'll type a word and then you're holding down backspace to try and delete it. That's not really a good behavior to rely on for a long period of time because it's just ultimately inefficient. One of the things that this layout's really good for is Control Backspace. So if you don't know, at least on Windows, when you type Control Backspace, it will delete the entire word to the left. And that's really useful. And that's something I never really used. But now that Control and Backspace are just on the pinkies, I can very easily do that. Also, even though if you hold down this button, it's Control, if you tap and hold it, it will revert back to that backspace behavior. So it's not really a big deal. And on occasion, I'll click a Control feature too quickly where I'll do like Control whatever, and then it backspaces because I typed a little too quickly. But that's not really a big deal. I really find that these keys are really good. I'm very happy with these. So now let's sort of discuss the symbols again. The main one I changed is right here. I put underscore here for a good sort of reason. So I wanted equals to be on a reachable key, and the index finger is a pretty reachable key. But it's more than that, right? I have to be able to roll into equals from multiple places. And one of the problems was minus used to be here. And it was also weird having minus so far away from plus, because suppose you're trying to zoom in or out of a page with Control, plus, and minus. It's really weird when minus and plus are on weird places on the board. So I said, okay, underscore. Ideally, underscore would be on the capital layer so that if I'm typing like a constant name in a language where it's all caps and underscores, you could just do like pi underscore like math or something, and you wouldn't need to unshift. But that's the cost I have to pay for this, where boo-hoo, right? If I'm typing all caps and I need an underscore, I just have to let go of shift, press it, and go back. It's not too big of a deal, I don't think. But I also have the benefit of if I'm typing snake case, so if I'm just typing like lowercase words, I can just press underscore now on this layer without pressing shift. So what I lose with capital constants, I gain with snake case in general. And I find That's probably the biggest reason people don't use snake case, is just because it's harder to type. Because underscore is usually not in the best location, whereas here, it's basically no different than any of these letters. It's fine. So this is the only one of these middle ones I've changed, but I've also changed the rest of these. The key thing here with equals is you're never going to press like semicolon equals or open parenthesis equals usually. And so colon equals is really easy to type. Not equals is really easy to type. Okay, so now let's figure out, well, we have the number row. Where did the rest of the symbols go? Well, I've experimented with having these braces on these pinkies, and I find that they're pretty easy to reach, so I've decided to keep them here. I keep the brace on the shifted layer because I'm just used to it being a shifted thing, so even though I type it more often, I'd rather it be on the shifted layer. And that's going to be a common theme here, where I put equals on the shifted layer even though I type it often, because colon and not, for example, are on the shifted layer. And so I'm focusing on the bigrams, right? The colon equals or the not equals bigram. If I had to type colon on this layer, let go, and then press equals on this layer, that just interrupts the bigram, and it's just not very good. So you really want bigrams to be on the same layer if you can help it. That's another thing I've sort of figured out. Okay. So I then decided, well, if equals is going to be on the left, then I should put the majority of the things that roll into it on the right. So I started, okay, minus, if I'm typing, instead of like an underscore as a separator for words, sometimes you use a dash as a separator, especially if you're working with like HTTP or web stuff. So I put this on the most reachable key, which is on the middle finger, so it's very easy to reach. And then I said, okay, well, I want plus to be next to minus so that I can do control plus and minus. That just makes a lot of sense. And because it's on the right, it's easy to roll into because they're on two separate hands. And then I said, okay, I also will do the star symbol all the time. And the star symbol is useful for, obviously, multiplication. It could be useful for exponents in something like Python, but it's also really useful as a dereference symbol in C or in Go, or in a lot of other languages. So I also have this here, and then, well, put slash on the pinky, because slash has always been on the pinky. It makes a ton of sense. And it's also still really reachable up there. And so you could still do slash equals. Super nice. And then it just kind of makes sense. Okay, let's just put percent next to it. We put it in the top corner because it's really not that frequently used, I find. Maybe if you're doing a lot of modular arithmetic or some weird stuff, but, you know, it's still very reachable there. Then I need a symbol on this layer that goes there. I said, well, @ symbol's pretty good, right? If you're typing email addresses or something, you probably want an @ symbol that is reachable on the base layer, so it kind of makes sense to be there. And even if you're doing something like @ followed by like parentheses, that's very easy to type. So unless you're doing like @z or something, you're not going to do like a same finger bigram. So I'm pretty happy with the right hand side. I then put $ over 6 because I just don't type $ that often. So I want it to be harder to get. But more importantly, in a lot of languages, you use $ to do like string templating or interpolation. So, for example, in Bash, if you're doing some math stuff, you might need to do $ open parentheses. And so that $ being on the right makes a lot of sense, so that if you can imagine if this were $, if I want to do $ open parentheses, that's a same finger bigram, which is not ideal. Whereas here, it's two separate hands, which is nice. And then similarly, the $ and the open brace, those are two separate hands, so that's really nice. So now let's look at the left-hand side. I'm thinking, which symbols do I use the most? Well, probably the ampersand, because we do Boolean and we also have the address operator for doing pointers. It's like, okay, well, I also use or pretty frequently, so let's put or next to and. And I put tilde up here because I put the caret, I put the caret here because in languages like Odin, this is also the pointer symbol, similar to the star. So I want to be reachable. And often if you do control caret in Vim, it will take you to your last open buffer, which is super useful. So I want that to be reachable. And most importantly of all, there is technically a bigram here, a same finger bigram of the caret and the equal sign, but you do that so infrequently. Almost have never done XOR assignment like that. So if I have to do that like once in a year, then I'm fine with that, right? No keyboard layout's gonna be perfect. You're never gonna avoid every single like same finger bigram and all those things. So I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I put tilde on this pinky because it kind of just need a place, but most importantly, you can see all the things I'm considering, right? This one, if you're working in Linux, tilde is the home directory, so on the pinky it's very reachable, but more importantly, I can do tilde slash if I'm doing something relative to the home directory. That's the real reason it's on the left. I put tilde on the left so I could roll into the slash symbol. And it's like you have all these different things that you have to consider. It's like, okay, how do I use these symbols? Where do I use them? And where do I have to put them so that it sort of makes sense? Then I put backtick on the left pinky. It's very useful for like different types of strings in certain languages, or if you're using like Markdown, you might need to do triple ones, which it's not ideal because pressing 3 at a time is kind of a little bit of a pain, but it's fine. Now I did have to break the symmetry of slash and forward slash and backslash being a shifted version of one another, but there's a good reason for that. The majority of the time that I'm typing backslash, it is to do backslash n or backslash t, maybe backslash 0 or backslash or backslash quote symbols, right? So, well, n and t and quote and 0 are all on the right-hand side. For a long time, I had my backslash on this pinky, or like one of these places on some layer, I would have a backslash. But I realized how stupid that is because it introduces a same finger bigram every single time that you do slash n, which is the majority of the time that I press that key. And I type that all the time in languages like Go or C or literally anything, right? Like that's just so common in programming. So putting it up here on the base layer so that you can just do slash n or slash t or slash 0 without shifting, it just makes a lot of sense to me. So that's why I put it up there in that seemingly weird place. So last but not least, I put these shifts, these tilde, wow, my brain, these chevrons, these angle brackets less than or greater than symbols on this layer next to these other braces because I figure they're pretty easy to reach and they're next to the other braces, so it kind of makes sense. If I'm going into the equal sign, it's fine. It's not ideal, but it's pretty reachable. You also notice I don't have a different version on the shift layer. The reason is I just didn't have any other symbols to put. So I said, well, if I'm working in, say, HTML, then having this on this layer is really good because that means I could do like symbol div end, and then I don't need to shift at all to do that. But I definitely still want it on the shifted layer so that I can do a bigram on one layer, like I mentioned before, because I think that's a lot more efficient than having to press, then shift, then press, because that's just really annoying. Okay, so that's basically most things, but there is one thing I didn't really consider. The one thing that I may end up changing is in a lot of languages, you use an arrow bracket. That the two arrows are the symbols I didn't really consider. So this one, in maybe JavaScript, if you're using like an anonymous function, where it's equals and then greater than, that is pretty easy to reach, but there's the other angle bracket for like lambdas in Java or whatever, or as return types in Odin, is minus greater than. And now that one is a bit more finger work to hit. Like my whole hand sort of has to jump because my middle finger has to go very high and then my ring finger has to go very low. So that's what I'd say is the least ideal part of this layout because I just didn't really consider it. So, but it really depends because as I've presumably titled this video, this is the last layout for my Ergodox that I think I'm going to have. And the reason for that is I've gone ahead and I've purchased a Glove 80. And it's not that the Ergodox is a bad keyboard. In fact, I really like this board. It's very good. But Some of these keys are just really hard to reach, like 5 and 6. And the problem is it's just a flat keyboard. It's a flat board, and our hands are just like the way our fingers move is not flat. It just doesn't correspond well. So I wanted a board that had a concave keywell just to see, right? I just want to try it. I'm into keyboards, clearly. I've done like hundreds of revisions of this layout, for better or for worse, to try different things. And most of the things I've done were trying to avoid reaching keys that are hard to reach. And part of the problem is that's dependent on the keyboard you have. If you have a board that has more reachable keys for your hands, then you can take advantage of those. For example, I don't put anything like down here because I just find that those are hard to like reliably hit. They're just in like a weird spot because the keyboard's flat and my fingers just don't reach it in the right way. Like these are really weird too. So that's why I left them blank. And that's why I don't really use the thumb keys. What I put on the thumb keys is, while I have an Alt key, I have shift keys because, as you see, my shift layer is sort of fake. So I do have my shifted letters. I have my shifted letters, but suppose you need to do like Control Shift 1 or something. Well, I don't have a Shift 1. So that's why I have the Shift key in case I need to manually do like an actual Shift 1 or like a Shift comma or something. And I can even come in here and do like Shift colon if I need that for something. But yeah, back to the Glove 80. That's going to be coming, I believe, delivered tomorrow. And so that's going to be interesting. And that's going to open the door to potentially changing some of this stuff in the layout. But based on everything I've learned, I'm like very happy with this. I don't know how I'm going to change things when I have that board because I just don't know how it feels yet. So maybe I'll end up making a video on a layout on that. But this, I believe, will be the last layout I have on this board, which I'm pretty happy with. Given all the different things I've tried, this is very good. This is like very close to ideal, I think. And you also notice there's some nice coincidences. I didn't really do this intentionally, but on the right hand symbols, you have like all your arithmetic symbols. If you notice, you have like plus, minus, times, divide, and like remainder. And I guess $, whatever. And on the left-hand side, you have your bitwise operators. So you have like XOR and OR, and you have bitwise not. So that's kind of nice. It's kind of nice that there's like these symmetries here. I have logical and next to logical or. I have some pointer stuff on all these sides, and I'm pretty happy with it in total. Now, I suppose there are some other layers to look at, especially my gaming layer, because my gaming layer is wild. But first, before we get that, there's one other aspect to typing, which is navigation. I tried for a while in Vim using J, K, H, and L for things, and in Engram, they're actually not in a bad place. So J is down and K is up, which is pretty fine, honestly. H is left and L is right. These are kind of weird, but at least they're next to each other on this layout, as opposed to something like Dvorak, where they're kind of just more all over the place. Although J and K, I think both J and K are in the exact same spot in Dvorak, but H, actually H is in the same spot too, but L is up over here. So what I've always been a fan of from the beginning is the idea of having your arrow keys underneath in a WASD pattern. And so what I have is my nav layer here. What I've done is I've shifted WASD over to ESDF so that my finger on the homing key doesn't have to move and I can just do this. I then put home and end up here in a very natural position where it's like, okay, left or far left, right or far right, and then page up and page down, very similar to up and down. I used to have like an Alt up and down here, but I prefer to sort of just press Alt with my hands. Wow, that's funny. I also have my F keys up here if I need them. And yeah, there's not much to this. I do also have some mouse inputs on the right, which I'm just sort of trying because on occasion your mouse is on like the wrong window, or like you moved your mouse to the other window, but you have to click on the page to like put it into focus. And so it's just annoying to, if you're already on the keyboard, to then have to switch. So I have this here. I don't really use it though. Now, okay, one more. I have the reset layer. Whole point of this is to just reset the board so I can flash firmware. There is a physical button But when I first got my board, the right half the physical button was broken, and the only reason I could use it was because I had a software button. So I will always have a software button on a board like this, just because. And also, I just find it more convenient than having to find a paperclip to push into the little hole to actually reset it. So I find this a good idea. I put it on this really hard to reach key, and I make it so you actually have to press the reset button in the reset layer, and you have to like stretch your whole hand over to reach it. So the whole idea is it's very hard to do accidentally. Now there's one more layer on here. I guess I can mention tab quickly. I kind of just need to put it somewhere, and so I decided to put it over here, and I have it so that, of course, since it's next to shift, you can't really press shift tab without like contorting your thumb. So I just have it so that if you tap, it's tab, and if you hold, it's shift tab. I think on the Mo Ergo Glove 80, I'm probably going to put tab on the left thumb because the thumb buttons are going to be more reachable. And if you're wondering what this camera is, this is just a screenshot button. It's just Windows Shift S, basically. I find that very useful. I actually really like that. So lastly, here's my most disgusting layer, but hear me out. Here is my my gaming layer. So just take it all in, right? Just take it in. Look at how it's really messed up in all of these ways. Oh my god, this just brings tears to my eyes. So first things first, because I have a custom typing layout, if I'm gaming, I would have to remap like every single game so that WASD is YCIE or OIEA, right? That would be just really annoying. Every single key would have to be remapped in every game, so it just makes sense. Just have a layer that you can toggle on and off that has your gaming stuff on it. And so for a while, I just had like a normal QWERTY layout. But I wanted to try, honestly, you know what game you can blame for this? You can blame GTA for like everything on this layer. So I wanted to have, I had like WASD normal, but I decided to shift it over to ESDF because sometimes I need arrow keys in games, and having the arrow keys one to the right of WASD was really weird. But of course, when I'm typing, having those arrow keys there makes tons of sense. But when I'm gaming, it was really stupid. So I said, okay, let me just move WASD so it's directly over the arrow keys on this layer. And so, honestly, I kind of really like it. It's kind of really nice because you can press T and G a lot more easily. Now, the problem is I want Shift to be in like the same relative hand place, so I had to put B down here. Kind of weird. I threw caps lock, delete, and backspace in here just so they're there, because in GTA sometimes you need them because the menus are just so horribly designed. So the left-hand side, I don't actually think is too crazy. The right-hand side, well, that's where things get a little more interesting. You notice some numpad stuff. That's because in GTA, it's really good to fly using the numpad. And of course, I don't have a numpad. So since I don't really hit the keys on the right side anyway when I game, I said, let me just throw a numpad on here. I did have numpad on another layer, but every time I played GTA, I just had that layer active, so it just seemed really dumb. So I just said, well, I'll just throw it over here and move these symbols around. You have to be a little careful to keep H, J, K, and L sort of relatively close, because some games will use that, like Kerbal Space Program, if you're using like RCS to go in directions, sort of like Vim. So you'd have to be a little careful with those. But yeah, and I also threw in some other symbols just in case. It's kind of a nightmare. And I've also been running into the problem of the function keys in Minecraft, because in Minecraft you often will do like F3 and G or like F3 and B to pop up different things in the game. So having F on this layer, like this, to press F3 up there just doesn't make sense because you can't really press F3 and G here. So I just said, well, using the same hold sort of features, if you hold the number, it will give you the function key. And then of course, well, we only have 10 digits, so I need to throw F11 and F12 over here. Looking at it, it's kind of just an atrocious layer, but it's honestly not that bad. When you're actually using it, it's not too big of a deal. The most annoying thing, obviously, is if I want to type in a chat, I have to go off the gaming layer, type, and go back. But, like, the alternative is remapping everything in game. That's like, this is just what happens if you're using an alternate layout. You either have to remap every single keybind in every single game, or you're going to have to do some weird thing where, in order to type, you have to switch off the layer. I suppose you could just be very good at typing in QWERTY, But then all of these modifications wouldn't work, obviously, because you couldn't type like this. And it's also kind of funny. By putting WASD over here, I kind of make QWERTY a lot better. Because you see, with A here, you actually have a trigram just like sitting here, like gas, which kind of would make it really nice to type. And if you had B over here, like BA or TA, those would be kind of nice like bigrams. So ironically, by making QWERTY really messed up, I kind of made it better because it's just such a crazy layout. So I thought that was kind of funny. Also, D is like really easy to hit, which is nice. Yeah, so that's basically the entire keyboard layout, at least at its current place in time. There have been a lot of different revisions and changes I've made, but hopefully this helped to explain sort of my thought process between all of these different things I've tried. And, you know, maybe some of those things that bothered me, maybe they won't bother you. So give them a try. Maybe I mentioned something I didn't like and you thought, I didn't even know that was possible. I'd love that. Let me go try it. So I hope that that was really useful. I hope you found some interest in some of these wacky things I've had to do. And hopefully I inspire you to improve your keyboard setup. So hope you guys enjoyed. If you want an update in like a month or two when I've gotten the Glove 80 configured properly, then let me know. Anyway, see you guys in the next video.